Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the Rant, everybody. It is Tuesday, December 6th, and we are in the right smack dab in the middle of the MLB winter meetings, which is exciting for if you're a fan of other teams, or just a baseball fan.
It was pretty exciting last night, at least. If you're, and again, it is every year this happens, right? It's the most hilarious thing, and I love how people will be like, "Don't write anything about it until it happens." I'm like, okay, you realize then that if we never put anything out until something actually happened, we would not have anything to write for the most, like no team would. Right, unless you be the Phillies, like, okay, then everything you write can only now be about Trey Turner until something else. Like, I don't know about you, that would get a little boring after a while. So, crazy me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they mean by all that stuff, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of kind of maybes and this could happen, that could happen type things kicking around. But what we do know is that Trey Turner's off the board. He signed with Philadelphia for an 11-year, $300 million contract. That's about $27 million a year. Not bad for him. I mean, 11, the AAV is maybe lower. It's definitely lower than what you're going to see Korea get for sure. And probably even Bogarts for that matter. But I think he wanted the length, right?
Length was better than girth for him.
Yes.
I think. I'm kind of a girth guy myself, so I'd rather go wider on the AAV than the length. But there again, I understand it. I know why. Am I still very loud?
No, I think you're good. I think it's just because I had my volume up on my computer so high.
We'll see. We're just screwing all kinds of stuff up. My computer restarted on its own the other day, and so I have it normally connected to dual monitors through a dock. And for those of you out there who have a similar situation, it's always really fun when you have to then go back in and remember how to properly set up the monitors on the display. So now I've got like everything on here looks small. I don't know if it looks choppy for everybody else. Like my video looks poor on my side. Anyway, all kinds of stuff. But no, I mean, I think it's very similar to what we saw with Bryce Harper signing in Philly, right? The total amount was big, but it was over 13 years. And so the average annual value was a little bit lower than maybe what we had anticipated. They
are going to be real fun to watch in about 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, it'd be like the old folks' home, the Phillies retirement home there. But here, and I put this out there, and a lot of people were like, "Holy crap, you're right." So imagine a team that's got Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, Bryce Harper, a top shortstop, a great catcher, and you're going, wait a minute, that's what I wanted the Cubs to be, like 3 years ago. That's what we thought they were going to be. And so it is just kind of funny to see how those different philosophies, because and we could add Zach Wheeler in there, right? Like the Phillies have spent a lot of money on really big contracts. They've got a couple of $300 million contracts now. Real Muto is 110. Schwarber got good money. Castellanos got good money. Wheeler got big, but like they have a lot of guys that are out there. And I, for one, I applaud them because you know what? I don't give a shit I don't care what the Phillies do regardless. But I mean, if I'm sitting there as a fan, I'm not worried about 6 years or 8 years from now. I just went to the World Series and lost. I want to freaking win now.
Yeah, exactly.
And here's the thing.
And for the next 4 to 5 years, arguably, right? I mean, I don't know what their system looks like, but
hey, 4 to 5 years, they bought themselves a ton of time to develop. You could remake the whole system in 4 to 5 years. Figure some things out as it goes along. Go big, and maybe if we piece the different reports together, the Cubs could try to do a little bit of that themselves here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a contest to win at the major league level, not a contest to see who can accumulate the most talent at the minor league level. Because if it was a contest for that, the Cubs would be doing really well.
They did really well in 2014.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not. It's a contest about major league talent and getting to the World Series and winning the World Series and things like that. So it does make you kind of wonder when you see teams like the Phillies going all in. And I don't know market size for the Phillies, but and I guess it depends on if you add New York into their market. But I would think that Chicago's a bigger market than Philadelphia. And so, and I think the Cubs are definitely valued higher than Philadelphia. And so it's just you look at things like that, and then you hear, just was it yesterday, that Jed Hoyer now has the green light to spend, quote, whatever he needs to turn the team around, and that's from David Kaplan and Gordon Whitmire. And so, two pretty reliable sources, two guys who are on the inside ish, who kind of get an inside track to things. Not always right when it comes to this type of stuff, but it feels like Jed really needs to kind of do something here. And last year, I have to give credit to Jed last year, because I think that, he didn't have a lot to work with. The team was really broken down to the studs, and he made some good signings. He got Suzuki, he got Stroman, and he did about as good as he could have done last year. And I think the second half of the year, the Cubs played really well. And so it's like, but now it feels like he really needs to pull the trigger. I mean, if you look at who the Cubs currently have on their depth chart, it ain't pretty, man. I mean, there's a big hole at first base, which hopefully Matt Mervis will fill. There's a pretty big hole at second base. There's a very big hole at third base. There's a big hole in center. And I mean, you could argue that you've got some utility guys there as your catcher, but another hole at catcher. And so it's like, if they were to go in with, not much more than what they've got right now, I don't think I think they're winning less than they won this year. And so like the minimum moves the Cubs need to make just to kind of field the team, right? I mean, I guess if they didn't make any moves, it would be chaos. It'd be anarchy. I mean, people would burn Wrigley Field down, I think. Maybe not, but or maybe they just go there and drink every day. Like, it just doesn't matter. I don't know.
Well, and so there's a couple of things to this, right? And I look at this, there's a few different factors to it. And the first of which is, and it's funny because there are still people who are like, it doesn't matter, they'll sell out anyway. I'm like, okay, that's a really neat trope that you've got there. But I think when we look at it and say, you know what, they've sucked for a couple years. They just had their lowest attendance since 1997. So I graduated high school. So that's a while ago, folks. Like, can we stop with the notion that they're just going to sell? Like, not only that, but they're bleeding season ticket holders. We've talked about this, but I know people who have literally had their names called up twice in the last year from the season ticket waiting list because they're burning through it. Like, they need to do better. Marquee's ratings have dropped 56% since they debuted. Obviously, it really sucked timing-wise to happen in a pandemic, but hey, guess what? If you have a network that is only based around, now they have some ancillary programming, but if it's based around a baseball team or any professional sports team, and that team sucks, guess what? People are not really going to be paying attention. I don't watch it. I wasn't even watching. I was watching football last night, but like the program.
Who's going to watch Marquee if it doesn't have to do with the Cubs? I mean, that is the whole point of the network. I think the whole Marquee network idea was really short-sighted. But
well, I think bringing in Mike McCarthy out of New York, who had done Big Ten Network or whatever, bringing in kind of a non-Cubs person, and I won't belabor this point because we've talked about it, but they had this idea. They had a thought about what Cubs fans wanted, what being a Cubs fan was about, and they brought somebody from the outside to try to synthesize that, and it just doesn't work. Like, they're trying to mass produce and repackage nostalgia in the form of a television broadcast. Is like, all right, there's only so much that I can put up with, because if your current product is shit, I'm not going to sit here and watch replays of the Sandberg game.
Yeah, I mean, there's too many other options on TV to watch. I mean, people want to see what's happening with the Cubs.
Yeah,
right now, and they want to watch games. I mean, that's it.
And they need them to be good
because that's not enough to build a network around.
Yeah, because guess what? If we look at our own viewership, readership on our site, it's very evident that when the Cubs are good, more people want to come to our site and read about the Cubs. When the Cubs aren't good, people take that is disposable time. And so anybody who sits there and thinks that, like, the people for a long time, I think, thought of the Cubs like cigarettes and liquor, in that the price elasticity was such, or gas. Like, people aren't going to quit driving cars because the gas prices go up. They're not going to quit smoking cigarettes because the price for a pack went up. They have it's very, very elastic, the pricing there. The Cubs are not nearly as elastic, and they're proving that because they have worn that rubber thin. But here's
they
the
are
thing.
If they're winning, though.
Yeah. If they're winning, they're fine. And that's what I'm saying, is that they have to change something, and I think they've started to realize that. And I would guess that the David Kaplan report was a direct. I think it was from Crane Kenny's mouth to our ears. I think is probably where that came from. I know he said like multiple MLB sources. I think Cap gets a lot of his stuff from Crane, but that feels very much, for one, it's calculated, right? So we have to look at that a couple different ways. And I'm not saying they're setting Jed Hoyer up to fail, but that report coming out when it did, amidst the Cubs being connected to Carlos Correa, to possibly signing both Bogarts and Swanson, or some combination of two, for them to say, hey, Tom Ricketts has said to Jed to go spend what it takes.
I think they're setting Jed Hoyer up to look like a failure if he doesn't execute.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't think they're setting him up to fail, but I think they're setting him up to look like
the potential. Yeah. He's sitting on a stool, and they have sawed through a 3-legged stool, and they have sawed halfway through one of those legs, so that if something, and Hoyer mentioned it, right? I'll get into this a little bit, but if things don't, if those players go sign elsewhere, Crane Kenny can come along and kick that leg out from under, that third leg out from under Hoyer's stool, and he falls on his ass. Now, part of what's funny about this, and Hoyer mentioned this too, right? He talked about, like, deals are complicated. And it's funny because somebody, this is great. This is the worst time of season for me to, and I always talk about this, I should never go to Facebook, but people are like, you keep lying to us. You keep saying the Cubs are interested in these players, and then they go somewhere else. I'm like, do you think the Cubs just go do you think it works that you just go and say, hey, we're interested in you. I'm going to kidnap you, and I'm going to stick you in my basement tied up until you agree to sign for us. That's not how it works. Like, the Cubs could have a great offer to somebody. Trey Turner. The Padres had a bigger offer to Trey Turner than what? Oh, Jesus Christ! Can we just ban this idiot?
Yeah, he gone.
And so the Padres, right? San Diego's pretty beautiful. I think we can agree on that. San Diego's got a ton of talented players. They've been competitive. They gave Trey Turner a bigger offer than what he got from Philly. But guess what? He wanted to be on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about money. It wasn't about all these things. And dude, there are no better.
Retire, Philly's the place to go.
Yeah. You got enough money.
Plus, San Diego actually is the better place to go. But
it would be a better place to go, but it's also more expensive. California's got a tremendous income tax. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you could look at. I mean, Jacob deGrom, Texas doesn't have state income tax. So deGrom got the bag there. He gets to go buy it. And
Texas is the place where really good players go to die.
Texas and Arizona, I feel like. I feel like a lot of guys end up because they retire out there. The Rangers? Yeah. They had that's when they were within 1 out when the Cardinals came back against them, like 2 outs in the 9th. That wasn't that David Freese or whatever.
Okay. I don't remember that, but
but the funny thing is, like, all these Mets fans are like, oh, screw this guy. Like, the cost of living in Dallas, right, versus the DFW area versus New York, first of all, is worlds different, and there's no income tax. And think about all the land. He's an outdoorsy guy. You go buy a big ass ranch down there somewhere outside the Metroplex, and have tons of time down there. So anyway, there's all kinds of stuff with all these moves that go deep. So it's not all these. but it's funny because I tweeted this out, and then a lot of people really appreciate it, and a lot of people kind of got upset. But I was like, if the Cubs are able to make a really big move, it would actually be kind of bad news for a lot of, because there are a lot of fans who have kind of made like hate. I don't want to say hating the Cubs, but made criticizing the Cubs like their sole personality trait, to where anything that comes out, their comments are just like, yeah, the offer's probably $5. Yeah, but Ricketts is cheap. They'll never spend it. Oh, they'll never land anybody. And it's like, look, I get being critical and I get being pessimistic about things, but there's a difference between criticism, pessimism, and then outright, like, only being happy when you're upset, right? Like wanting to be mad at the team. And I don't get that. If that was the case and you wanted to just feel shitty about it, why are you paying attention? There's got to be something else in your life that doesn't suck your joy away that you could go spend more time on. And so that's just so weird to me.
Well, and here's the thing with the Cubs, right? Is it feels like, there's a big party happening and the Cubs are involved. And I would say there's a big party happening and the National League Central's not involved. So it's kind of like, I mean, and is Jed Hoyer taking that into consideration when he's looking around trying to figure out what to do and how aggressively to be? Is he more concerned with the NL Central? I mean, if you're trying to win a World Series, you've got to be concerned with everybody else. And that's kind of where I come out, is like, when you look at the Cubs, do they have the ability, and you look across the horizon of the Major League Baseball, can they compete with the Mets, the Phillies, the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Padres? Is that realistic to think they're going to compete with them? And I think the answer to that is no matter who they sign. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this, if we continue the conversation as we have before, this still feels like, if they're able to pull off at least one of these big moves, it still has more of that 2014 into 15 feel. When they kind of caught lightning in a bottle there down the stretch in 15, right? But they did not go into 2015 thinking we're ready to compete with, and interestingly enough, at the time it would have been the Mets as well, right? Yes, and there's the comments going on. I literally, so when I looked like I wasn't paying attention, I was retweeting the post that I had that the Cubs did re-sign Braylon Marquez to a minor league deal. So that is out there. But and we can discuss that even a few weeks after he was non-tendered. So it's good to see. But yeah, I mean, I think their goal for now, and I never really understood the rationale at the, when they went to the expanded playoffs. Like, a lot of people thought it would curb spending, and that didn't make any sense to me, because I figured, well, you got more chances now to get in. And we've seen from teams like the Nationals that got hot, teams like the Braves that got hot, all you've got to do is get in, right? And if you do, you give yourself a chance to, especially early on in the shorter series, to make something happen. And so I don't think the Cubs are going into this with the intent of adding enough weapons that immediately they become a World Series contender. I think it's more about, hey, can we fight in the division? Can we get ourselves one of those playoff spots? And if we have enough weapons, and if we make some improvements in a couple spots, we can, we stand a puncher's chance. And I think that's where Hoyer talked about, being able to blow teams out and adding power. That, the Cubs team last year clearly was not built on that. But, even after 2016, when everything kind of came together, you looked at some of those teams, and with Yu Darvish at the front, obviously the offense didn't do anything, but with Yu Darvish at the top of the order, I shouldn't say the order, but the rotation, and Kyle Hendricks still pitching well, and some of those guys like Rizzo and Bryant Baez who could still hit the ball out of the park, you did stand a puncher's chance. Now, they absolutely swung and missed more ways than one against the Marlins, but they had that ability to go out and catch that lightning. So I think that's really what they're looking to do.
Last year, I mean, with the pitching came together in the second half of the season, I feel like that's really the solution, right? Is like, let's get the pitching in line, and let's really get a potent starting lineup there and a potent bullpen. And it doesn't need to be big flashy names, right? I mean, we saw guys that we had never heard of before last year come out of the bullpen for the Cubs and play really well. And so it feels like that's the first order of business, and they kind of have that in a pretty good condition. And I mean, we feel like they need to sign, a top line guy. I don't know if that's going to happen. There's obviously a lot of different options out there. There are trade options, things like that. We'll have to see what happens there. But conceptually, they could go forward with, they've got 5 starters.
Yeah. I mean,
Right. I mean,
yeah.
And it's not bad. You don't look at it like, oh my God, but it does feel like, they do need to add at least one kind of 2-3 guy.
Yeah.
And who knows what's going to happen with Hendricks.
Yeah. And I still, that's kind of the thing, is like the issue there too, is he's got like that, the torn capsule or whatever, which is like, in a lot of cases, guys try to rehab it and they end up needing surgery anyway, which would effectively ruin his Cubs career. If he can even pitch again. But, I look at that though. My issue with, kind of the available mid-tier guys, and this is something I've written about a couple times. Like, there are 3 very clear top starters, 2 of whom have already signed, right? So we've seen Verlander and DeGrom come off the board. Rodon's out there. And Jesus, if that guy didn't come out, really, like, seeing DeGrom get what he did with that 3rd year guaranteed, seeing what Verlander got, like, Rodon's out there going, he's got to be looking at least 6 years at this point. So, but all those guys getting the bag like crazy means your Chris Bassett's and your Jameson Tyons, maybe Taijuan Walker, are going to be asking for more money, understandably so, than I think what was originally projected. And now I sit there, and I hate to be that, to kind of justify the intelligent spending thing, but there's a point at which I look at that and I go, none of those guys are difference makers in a rotation. Bassett's probably the closest to it. But they all strike me as like, okay, if I already have an ace and, a number 2, 3 guy, here's my dude who slots right into the middle of that rotation and gives me a solid effort every 5th day. That's not counting on a win every time. They aren't big strikeout guys. They don't blow you away with a lot of stuff, which is kind of why I was leaning toward Andrew Heaney, because that's a dude who has got crazy swing and miss stuff. However, he's also looking for 4 years, and he's super. So, and all those guys, like, that's other things. A lot of people like, hey, Heaney's so injury prone. I'm like, go back and look at Taijuan Walker and Nathan Eovaldi and Chris Bassett and Jameson Taillon, and you tell me which one of those is your workhorse. I think when I looked at those, and we can include Kodai Senga, although Senga I would put at the very, very top of that tier 2. He's the one guy who I'd say, if I'm going to throw some money at a pitcher in that second tier below those 3 elite guys, Senga to me is by far the one. But if you combine all of them, I did this the other day, so I think 5 of those pitchers who are kind of in that middle tier, and you say, how many times combined out of, I think, 30 some professional seasons that they've all had, have any of them ever gone over 180 innings? And it's like 5 times ever. And I think Eovaldi's 2 of those, and he's been really injury prone. So you don't count on a ton of that from anybody, but the Cubs are already dealing with a rotation that, as you said, it's good, it's solid. But how many of those guys are you sitting there going, yeah, I'm counting on this dude to make 33 starts and give me 6 innings every day? Like, none of them are in that category. So they're not going to go after Rodon. And in that case, I get really concerned that they're going to throw a premium price at one of these pitchers simply because the market has dictated that. And I don't know that they're going to get the kind of return on that I'd almost rather see them go. If you can find, again, that's why I'd rather see them throw money at Senga, just because I think the upside there is tremendously higher.
What's going on with Senga? Yeah. There hasn't been a lot around what's happening there, and
Morosi or Heyman or somebody, one of the Johns, recently said the Cubs are still involved. They hadn't really been tied to him, but people noted that too. I think the Japanese players tend to operate a little differently, and when we heard about Suzuki signing with the Cubs, it was like, and then we found out that, hey, he had visited Chicago kind of over a cold winter weekend and had been out there, and they gave him the pitch. And so it was kind of like, hadn't really heard much there. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, signed with the Cubs. So I think they're still very much in play. I would imagine. I mean, they've been connected to pretty much all. I haven't heard them. I don't think I've heard them directly connected to Eovaldi, He would actually be another one for me though. Like I would personally rather take on a little bit more of that risk in exchange for somebody who's got the kind of stuff that will play up a little bit more, because the one thing the Cubs don't have, other than, we say Hayden Wisniewski, can Justin Steele become that guy? Maybe, but they still lack one of those pitches. Like nobody in their starting rotation is throwing the ball 100, right? Nobody's up in those upper 90s, 100 miles an hour that we're seeing from pretty much every other rotation. Nobody's out there really, scaring opponents with the threat of a double-digit strikeout game every time they take the mound. If a Cubs pitcher strikes out 8, we're like, holy crap, that's great. And it is. That's good if you do it over 5 or 6 innings or whatever. But they just don't have as much swing and miss stuff. Obviously, the flip side of that is, hey, you go out there, you add yourself an elite shortstop or two. You've got Nico Horner. Like, man, I'm still kind of salivating over the idea of getting Bogarts and moving him to third, getting Swanson, put him in short, putting Horner at second, and then getting a real center fielder and another defensive catcher. Now you're looking like, holy crap. Yeah, we're great up the middle. It's good. Like, just throw all the grounders you need, man.
Yeah, and I mean, somebody mentioned who's the starting 5 for the Cubs. I think you're
Samson,
talking,
baby. I want to talk to Samson.
Hendricks, Stroman, Wisniewski, Steele, Thompson, and Samson. That's your 6. Right?
Yeah. I mean,
listen, I've got no problem with Adrian Sampson as a 5. He pitched really well last year. And if he can repeat what he did for the Cubs last year, he's solid. Good number 5.
Well,
right?
shit, if he pitches like that, he's like a 3 or a 2.
But you don't expect that. But
no, and I still like. I'm just gonna keep warning about regression until it eventually happens. There were a couple times where I was like, oh, see, there it is, and the next game he would come back out and do really well again. But
well, the funny thing is he was DFA'd last year twice.
Yeah,
and here's a guy who his ERA for the year was 3.11. I mean, those guys don't grow on trees.
Yeah, no, he was real. What was his FIP?
His FIP was 4.4.
Okay.
I'm sorry. His FIP. Sorry. No. His FIP was 3.79.
Well, that's not bad. Was xERA what was higher, or was it the xFIP?
xERA was higher.
Okay. Which I mean, it makes sense, right? Because he gives up a bunch of hard contact, but he managed to avoid it. And again, part of that is he did change some pitch grips and shapes and sequencing and things like that. So, that's how you kind of get away from historical norms in that regard. But I do also look at this and see, there's so many other wrinkles to it that we get into something like saying, again, the white whale of landing 2 of those shortstops. But now all of a sudden, as we talked with the Phillies, right, you have now secured and say they work out an extension with Nico Horner, and you got Matt Mervis at first. Well, okay, outside of injuries, right, your infield is set for the next 5 to 6 years. And so now you're talking about Christian Hernandez and Ed Howard and Kevin Mate and James Triantos and some of these other guys. You're going, all right, we're not going to trade them all, but certainly you end up having a lot more flexibility in terms of trades than what you would, especially now, because the real big problem that they've got, if you start to look at trading for a pitcher, doing something like that, right? You've got Alexander Canario, who's out for several months yet. Brennan Davis, stress reaction, right? And this goes back to, and I want to say, so if I want to mark this, and we can go back a few weeks and look at it. And I said, at the time, I don't think it's related to what he had before, outside of the fact that you have a guy who was on the shelf for a while. He got back. I think he probably pushed it too hard. Something happened. If you look at the definition of a stress reaction, it is very specifically, it's when people make big changes in their activity and their load levels, possibly in the different surfaces they're playing on. And it happens when, your bones naturally break down, just like muscles, when you work out. And a stress reaction occurs when the bone degradation is happening faster than the recovery. And it causes
everybody out. But because it feels like the Cubs should have known better.
Yeah. Well, and this has been an area that I've harped on for a long time, specifically because if you look back to 2018, and I wrote about this when it was diagnosed in Yu Darvish, and that's when I first really learned about stress reactions, particularly in the elbow, and how they go severely underdiagnosed, particularly in youth athletes, just because, hey, growing pains, whatever. But if you recall 2018 and how fans were really upset and thought Darvish was dogging it, thought he was just weak and a coward or whatever because he didn't want to pitch. They thought he was scared. And because he'd go out, he thinks he was fine, and he'd have a rehab outing, and then he'd get shut down again. And the Cubs couldn't diagnose it. And they did MRIs, nothing showed. They finally had to do an arthrogram MRI where they have to inject the dye in there, and then you see it, and they're like, oh, and they figured it out. And you eventually had to get the elbow cleaned up surgically afterwards. Same thing happened with Brandon Morrow. And so I'm sitting there going, hey, guys, like, this is something. And when it's one thing, like, elbow's bad for a pitcher. When you're talking about a back, if that goes untreated, which obviously it's not, they caught it, you can end up having like a slipped disc, right? And then now we're talking about something really severely structural, but that can take a long time. It's your back, dude. You can't.
I mean, if there's anything you can't overcome as a Major League Baseball player, it is a back injury.
Yeah, it's
you can't
kind of
play
rotational
with a sore back.
Yeah, and so that hopefully they caught it early enough, right? I mean, they obviously they didn't share anything about it, but I mean that could take months to properly recover from. He's young, and maybe it'll be sooner, and I'm sure they've got things they can do there. But it's just that's really tough. You've got your top two outfield prospects, or two of your top outfield prospects, who I think Canario was by far the most likely to have been moved in any kind of a deal, but that's not happening. And then you look at there's talk that the Cubs are involved with the A's on the Sean Murphy trade. I think that's more talk. The Cubs are kicking the tires just to see, because hey, they'd love to have a catcher and they want to add offense, and that makes sense. But you're talking about a dude who's probably going to command 3 to 4 top level prospects, right? So now you're going, okay, Cubs, are you willing to give up? Let's say Keegan Thompson is the major league ready guy. Are you going to give up Kevin Alcantara and Owen Casey and maybe Triantos or Hernandez or somebody like that? Like, that's a really big haul. But
yeah,
if you've signed 2 shortstops and then you make a trade for a stud catcher who's only making $3.5 million and is still under club control for 3 years, I mean, you could part with some of those guys. You say, hey, we'll extend Ian Happ. We got Seiya Suzuki. We don't need 4 outfielders, 5, 6 outfielders. We can't do that. So there's a lot of stuff that's all these wrinkles that follow from some of these moves.
And we hear all this about the Cubs have made offers to multiple free agents. And what concerns me there is that the way that the Cubs went about negotiating with their core when they were on the team, and how they felt like, they were making offers that they felt like, quote unquote, would hold up in the marketplace. And some of them did, and most of them didn't, I think. But, and I'm worried that Jed Hoyer takes that same approach. Like, this is a reasonable offer when he's operating in, kind of a vacuum, so to speak, where he's not really understanding the market. And that the Cubs end up missing out on basically all of the big guys. And we hear Jed Hoyer at a press conference later in the year talking about how they made reasonable, good offers to, X, Y, and Z, kind of as an excuse for why they didn't sign anybody. And I can see that happening.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, but whether he's done it himself, or I feel like actually what was happening is like, so, Jed was here, he's looking to renovate the house. He's painting the walls. And then Crane Kenny came in. Jed's got his earbuds in. He's blasting his music. And then Crane came in and painted the floor behind him. Right. And he's like, fuck you, buddy. You're in the corner now. You got to wait for this paint to dry. And so to an extent, I could see where, Hoyer kind of got put there a little bit by some of those. But when you say we've got offers out there, and when we also hear you've been given effectively a blank checkbook to go out and make it happen, then it puts it firmly on his shoulders. And if that screws up, and keep in mind too, Cubs convention's coming back. So you've got Cubs convention coming up. You've got fans who are pissed off at a lot of things. If you don't make something happen, if you sit back and say, that would be very, very, and want to make sure I'm clear on this, that I'm not saying the Cubs will sign someone just because of Cubs convention. And I'm definitely not saying they're going to like wait on the convention and do the, because for the longest time, people kept thinking there was always going to be some big announcements. Like, no, when the team's actually good, you don't have to resort to those shenanigans. So they stopped doing that. Like everybody's like, oh, who are they going to reveal this time? Like, that was like a Kerry Wood thing. That's not going on anymore. And so, I think, I think they're at the point now. We talked about falling attendance. We talked about Marquis plummeting ratings. We've talked about the situation that they have discussed, that they have kind of talked themselves into. If they fail at this point to land, and I'm not even saying just one big free agent, they've got to go out and get more than one guy in there. I mean, they have to fill more than one hole on the roster, period, right? And so, if they fail to do that, it's a really, really bad thing in general for not just the front office, but the team as a whole, that I don't think they're going to allow that to happen.
Yeah. Well, you kind of hope not. So it'll
Adrian,
be interesting.
YOU''RE. But if you go to the convention any year, you're kind of a sucker. That's the whole point. The whole thing is to separate Cubs fans from their money via nostalgia. So,
yeah. However, whatever it takes, really, at the end of the day. And so something else that I saw was the Brewers add Jesse Winker, and that is such a Brewersy move. I love Jesse Winker. I'm going to hate him on the Brewers. I think he's vastly underrated, and he's just exactly the type of player that the Brewers always seem to sign. I hate it.
Well, they didn't sign it. They traded Colton Wong for him.
Well, whatever. Yeah,
but it was like a salary neutral move. That's what. Yeah, I corrected you because it was a dumb comment. I'm sorry. I'm talking to our commenters as we're live. Yes, bro. I just corrected Santa. Ho ho ho, bro. But yeah, it was. I don't get it from the Brewers' perspective, because what are they gaining from that? Again, it's not. They didn't dump salary, really, right? They didn't necessarily. I mean, they Wong was a pretty good player. I wanted the Cubs to get him somehow. And so, Winker could bounce back and be really good like he was with the Reds, but I don't get that. But I don't get what they're doing. I assume they were trying to dump salary, which it seems like overall it looks like maybe they're trying to do and reset things. But that move isn't it, unless there's like a subsequent one that they're going to pull off. But it does, like you said, though, it feels Brewersy, and it definitely feels like something where like Winker is going to absolutely revive himself back in the NL Central and just absolutely haunt the Cubs.
Yeah, he will. He will be an MVP. There's no doubt about it. So, I mean, it's obvious the Cubs need to do something, because they need to field a 26-man roster, and right now I don't think they're quite there. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Do you think anything's going to happen though before the winter meetings end for the Cubs?
I think it kind of has, like, something. I feel like
anything, right? Like just a mid-level, not exciting kind of signing.
Well, I mean, I think, catcher is a position. Of course, we talked about Murphy, right? I mean, that's a fun revolving door, because there's the Sean Murphy situation, but then, the Astros are involved in that. And so the Astros don't want to sign Wilson Contreras until they know what happens with Murphy. But the Cardinals are apparently in on it. The Guardians are in on it. So you're hearing the same people involved in Murphy and Christian Vasquez, right? But Vasquez didn't want to come back to the Astros because he didn't want to operate in a timeshare, a pretty even split with Martin Maldonado, former Cub. You may have forgotten because he was only there for 3 weeks and only played 4 games. And it's I'll get into that maybe, but then where he signs, right, Vasquez, that is, could then determine, what the Cubs do. Does he want to come to Chicago and play? Because they've got Yan Gomes, probably not 50-50. They'd probably be able to give Vasquez a majority of the time behind the plate, but Gomes is going to get a lot of time. Does Vasquez prefer a spot like St. Louis, maybe, where they would be able to give him that if the Cardinals don't land Murphy? So I'm interested. I still think I think Contreras to Houston makes a lot of sense, which again is really, really funny to me.
Did I lose you? Oh, I just lost Evan. We've lost Evan, everybody. That's okay. He's muted.
Back.
Oh, sorry. You're back. You're back.
Okay.
It's the production value. See, normally in a podcast we would cut that out, but we choose to do things live here.
Yeah, it's always fun when this comes
risks.
out. But no, no, I think if you look at, again, where does Vasquez want to go? But here's what's funny is that the Cubs traded for Maldonado. That's who they traded Mike Montgomery to the Royals to get Maldonado as a backup when they had Wilson Contreras and Victor Caratini, because Contreras went on to the IL. And then, Maldonado played for a few games and then didn't play again as soon as Contreras came back. So after like 2 weeks, and then Maldonado's like, well, this sucks. I want to go to a place where I'm going to play. And so they traded him to Houston, where he had played before. So then he's down in Houston. Now he's been their primary starter. Vasquez gets traded to Houston. Vasquez doesn't play all that much and didn't play very much in the World Series at all because Maldonado kind of, again, took over. So Vasquez leaves because he's not getting enough playing time, or he doesn't want to come back because he's not going to get enough playing time. Now, interestingly enough, Houston looks like the front runners to land Wilson Contreras, who supposedly wants to be more of a full-time starter, but will have to cede a whole lot of the time to Martin Maldonado, who left the Cubs because Wilson Contreras pushed him out of playing time. So I just think it's kind of a funny full circle way that this whole catching carousel is working. In the end, I want the Cubs to sign Tucker Barnhart. That's where I'm landing on it, even though Christian Vasquez is probably a better fit. Yeah. I like Tucker. He's from here in my same hometown, and I think that would be fun. But
I have no problem with Yan Gomes. I mean, I got to be honest with you. He's a good manager of the staff, and that's really what you need at the end of the day. Having a guy that can, bat 300 or 280 and, hit 30 home runs behind the plate is great if you can get it. And he can also manage the staff. But man, that's a tough combination. It just doesn't really happen. And it's not realistic to think is going to happen. And you're much better off having a guy that's batting 250, hitting 15 home runs, and that can manage the staff.
Yeah, as long as they go out and make those upgrades somewhere else. Like, and this is I wrote something about this because Barnhart is on the Cubs' radar. I put this out right before we went on the air. And that I think it'd be great. But he's definitely a step down offensively. I mean, definitely from Contreras, but also from Vasquez. He's two-time Gold Glove winner, by far a defense first type of catcher. You can get away with that if you go out and make very significant upgrades elsewhere up the middle. You've got to get a big-time shortstop. You've got to go out and get a center fielder who can not only pick it but can hit a little bit. You got to add there to the DH. Third base probably needs more consistency because, man, I saw something out there the other day, I forget where, about somebody who thought Morel could take over, more of those. I mean, unless that improves tremendously, like, dude, it was not fun watching Chris Morel try to play third base. I did not enjoy that.
He's just not. He triple clutches. He's made many
and fires at 1,000 miles an hour for an error.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
It's not a good look. He's not going to be a third baseman for a championship team. Let's put it that way.
I just keep, ever since I started really thinking about it in earnest, I love the idea of going out, getting Bogarts, getting Swanson. Here's the other thing. So Dansby Swanson, his fiance, Mallory Pugh, plays for the Chicago Red Stars. So, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, the seasons overlap almost identically? Wouldn't that work out well? They're getting married this weekend. So, he either probably wants to get something done now, or he's going to have to wait a few weeks to get something done. I doubt he's going to be trying to get signed on his honeymoon. I don't know. Maybe he will. But Xander Bogaerts grew up in Aruba watching the Cubs on WGN, right? Wanting to hit home runs onto Waveland. Yeah. So, hey, go out, get these two cool stories. Not as much pure star power as what Correa would bring, but realistically, if you look at the projections and you figure some of this stuff out, you could potentially sign both of them for almost the same, maybe a little bit more than what Correa is going to get, but for possibly 2 to 4 years less time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd try to inflate those AAVs, get those guys for 6 years combined. You're talking about 55 to 60 million, right? Between them, again, accounting for perhaps inflating those AAVs to keep the contract shorter. And you still got plenty of money left for this year. And that's before Jason Hayward's salary falls off and Kyle Hendricks falls off.
Yeah.
After this year. I mean, I just love that idea because now all of a sudden you're going like, man, that infield looks pretty damn good. And you have, and let's say they go and get Correa and that's it. But I think the bigger overarching theme of that is not just what does this one player or these two players do to impact the team statistically. It's you go out, you make that splash, you are saying to the rest of the league and to those other players, okay, just like it was with John Lester, we're serious now about competing. Speaking of John Lester doing a recruiting job, meeting with
for the
Xander
Cubs.
Yeah.
Away from the Red Sox, which is interesting and entertaining. Here's the one thing that I'm a little bit concerned about with the word that Jed Hoyer has as a green light to spend kind of whatever he wants to, is when you put that out there in the market, you kind of lose negotiating strength that you might otherwise have, right? And so suddenly it's like, if you go out there and you're like, hey, I mean, Tom over here, he's only given me so much. We're going to try to make it work. And, so you've got leverage in a negotiation when you have kind of good cop, bad cop playing out. But now where you've got the word on the street is, oh, you have unlimited amount of money. So that hurts Jed to a certain extent because it loses leverage. And so where he can come into a negotiation and try to play poor, whether he is or not, versus coming into a negotiation and then, them knowing this is like, Scrooge McDuck, basically, you lose a little bit of leverage and you can lose perspective in terms of if you're negotiating with Bogarts or Korea and their camp saying, oh no, we need this. And yet they really haven't had any offers that are close to that. If you were playing poor, you could try to kind of, work your way up to that, what they need, quote unquote. But if you're rich, then there's no reason why you can't meet that number. And that concerns me.
Although I would take the opposite side of that and say, if you're poor and they're looking at it and saying, if you were legitimately operating under a constrained budget, then you can't call a bluff. They don't believe you're actually negotiating with Correa, who's going to make way more than Bogarts. But if they can negotiate with Correa and meet that price, they can go to Bogarts and be like, hey, man, we're cool with moving. Like, we'd be happy to meet his $330 million, but what can maybe we work out with you? Because, hey, if we're able to get you at this, think about the other players we could add. We could make this thing competitive in a hurry. And you can go to Correa and say, yeah, I mean, we'd be cool with that at, 8 years and 320. But, hey, man, we got Dansby and Xander over here. Dander. We got, Dandy Swangarts, whatever. Dander Swangarts over here. And we'll sign both of them. Like, we'll tell you to pound sand. Not really, because, your agent is still Bogart's agent, but you want that much, like that. We could do it. But then if we do, right, how's this? But we got, so I think there's a little bit of that. And then also, saying, hey, we got the money. I think there's a level to which, if you look at Correa last year, never felt the Cubs were serious. And Bogarts questioned, in the season when asked about it, whether they'd be seriously trying to compete. And I think that's part of it, is saying, hey, we've got this open checkbook, is at least then you can go to those players. And if they feel like you're lowballing them and aren't going to go up and they got no room, then they'll just tell you to piss off. Like, okay, you're unserious about this. We don't even care. And what we don't want to be, if I'm a free agent looking at this, a situation like the Cubs, as much as I might want to believe I'm the difference maker, I've got to sit there and look at that and be like, that roster's got, as long as, and hopefully they've got people in their corner telling them, the right things, that roster's got flaws. The last thing I want to be is some figurehead signing that I'm the only one that goes in there and then I don't get any help and I'm left languishing, in this spot. So if I'm a free agent, I love knowing, and I joked about that with the tweet that I kind of based off of Office Space, where I was like, Carter Hawkins is sitting there talking to Jed. He's like, hey, what'd you do if you had $350 million? And Jed's like, man, 2 shortstops at the same time. So I just think the idea that they can go out there and do that they're involved in all these players serves a few different purposes. It, again, it may spur some of those guys to want to get something done. If they, if they like the idea of playing in Chicago and they want to get something happening, they see that that's something there. And the fact that, it seems like Hoyer's got a bunch of lines in the water or irons in the fire or whatever you want to call it, that I think they want to try to be flexible with some of this stuff too, because as noted on whether it's the catching position, whether it's, the pitchers that are left, who we talked about in the middle tier, or whether it's these three shortstops, there are any number of myriad directions this thing could go. And so I think they kind of have to be out there and being very active. And this goes back to, when people are critical of it, like, oh, I don't want to read about it till it happens. What are you guys, clickbait, whatever? Like, okay, again, let's set aside what a dumb accusation that is on the surface. But, our job isn't to like just break news or only share information on a signing once it has happened. To me, I love stuff like this and exploring all the different possibilities that are out there. So then we can look back afterwards and still track back to, oh, hey, remember this? Or when that thing does actually happen, we've got the whole trail of breadcrumbs that we can go back and look at if we want to. Or sometimes that stuff comes out of nowhere, and that's fun too. But it's really weird to me when people are like, okay, saying this is stupid, like this is crap, you're a tabloid, don't report anything until it happens, would be like if you just waited until the post-game show of a game. Oh, no, why the hell would I watch the game? I'll just wait for the post-game and see the highlights once it's over. Like, don't you want to know how that score got to be what it was? Don't you want to see the game unfold so then you understand why the score was what it was? I don't know. It's people are weird. So
this is true. I guess we're going to have to wait to see what happens, obviously. But, with all the talk about, the big shortstops that were available, I know there's this, what feels like irrational talk around the Cubs possibly signing both of them. Let's just get one of them done, and then we can talk about getting two. That's what I want to see. I want to see just one get signed, and I would prefer for it to be probably Bogarts. I think is the best fit. I think if the Cubs sign Correa, I don't think there's a chance that they would sign Swanson. And so I don't know. I just kind of like Bogarts. Just kind of, Correa just seems kind of too, I don't know, snotty. Like, just kind of like too, you know what I'm saying? Like, he just, I don't know. I think just doesn't feel Chicago to me.
The Cubs would prefer Correa, all things considered. I think that would be their move. They loved him from his pre-draft workout. I know he had a good time there.
He's 27 years old.
Yeah. He's the one that got away back then. He's also younger than everybody else. And he's the biggest star. So if you're looking at those ancillary benefits, in addition to being a very good young player, he's the guy that draws eyeballs. He's the guy that puts butts in seats.
But I just don't think they're going to sign now that Turner's got 11 years. I just don't see him signing for anything less than 10.
I could see him doing it if they said, and this is what I wrote about, though. I said, here's $310 for 8 years. So more money than Turner. It would be, the AAV would be like 38.67, which would be the highest AAV ever for a position player. Mike Trout's at like 35.6, something like that. So he'd beat that. And you say, hey, that's 310 plus he made 35.1 last year. So now all of a sudden you're looking at that's 345.1 in 9 years, which puts him ahead of the 341.1 over 10 years that Francisco Lindor got to set a shortstop record. So now you've set an overall AAV record. You've set an overall mark in terms of money earned by a shortstop, and it's in an even shorter period of time. And, maybe there's some options on there. Maybe they throw some opt-outs into the thing, whatever. But I think there's a way that you can make that work. Again, would that be a lot of money? Hell yeah, it would be. That's almost $40 million. I mean, maybe you push it to 320,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's appealing. I just think there's going to be a team out there that's going to go longer. And it's whether he wants to go longer with a lower AAV. His AAV is going to be at least 30 million.
Oh, yeah. I mean, no unquestionably. I would think, I guess, like Turner's isn't, because it's 300 for 11, so he's like 27 million.
Exactly.
Which is
So
which is interesting. But I think that's also, I don't know if I might be conflating it with DeGrom. I know DeGrom's got like no deferrals or anything, and so Turner's also got a no trade clause, right? That's a big thing. That's something the Cubs weren't willing to do in the past. They did it with Senga, or not Senga. I'm sorry, Suzuki. Maybe they could do it with Senga. Get him in there. And that's only a 5-year deal, so it's a little bit different. But like the Chris Bryant thing, which we've talked about in the past, and we don't need to retread that ground, but they would not give him an NTC. That was a big thing. And Theo Epstein was really, really reluctant to give no trade clauses. That's super valuable to a player. Be shipped out at the first instance that, that maybe they look like they're trending down, or the team's trending down, or whatever. So there are ways you could build value in there that I think you could buy up. I know he wanted more time before, and 7 years wasn't enough last year. But if you went to 8 this year, again, you've effectively gone 9 with last year's 1-year deal. I'm maybe trying to rationalize it, but I'm also looking at it going, hey, if you can get more money, even if it is over a shorter period of time, because I'd rather have, if I'm going to get $310 million, I'd rather have it over 8 years than 11, personally. And maybe they figure out a way to say, hey, we'll defer, we'll kick some of that down the road, we'll defer it into, and we'll continue to pay you for 5 years after you're gone. So you've got security, even if your career ends at that 8-year mark. I think there's ways to get it done. But personally, I would rather see, I would rather see Swanson and Bogarts for a total of like 335, 340 than just Correa. That's me, because I feel like that settles a lot more things and spreads it out. But
we'll find out hopefully
soon enough, baby. Let's go.
Happen.
Be a nice wedding gift. Week. Dansby might not be able to afford that honeymoon otherwise. Better get him paid. Get him those stacks.
All right. Well, we'll circle back again next week. I don't know if we're going to do every week or every 2 weeks. We'll see. During this period, I guess we'll see if something pops. So if it pops, maybe we'll go again next week. And if something doesn't, if it's just kind of the status quo, then maybe we'll go a couple weeks. We'll see. We'll let everybody know. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us, everybody. It's been real, and have a good rest of your week.
Cool. See ya.